Hey, this is my presentation on terrorism, the attacks on September 11, 2001, the Persian Gulf War, and a few events leading up to that. Now, first of all, I want to ask you how many faces on this page do you recognize? And this is a question I ask my students. Okay, so if you're a South Park fan, you recognize Osama bin Laden. And here he is right here. He is the leader of an Al Qaeda terrorist network who will attack the United States on September 11, 2001. You might recognize President Bill Clinton. He was president in the 1990s. He became president in 93. Now, these two guys were president. This is President George Herbert Walker Bush, and his son is President George W. Bush. George W. Bush was the governor of Texas, and he will be president from 2001 till like very early 2009. And that's when Obama became president. And these guys, I Google imaged Taliban. I don't know. They might be. Okay. All right. So let's go back and let me tell you a story that you may not know. In 1979, the Cold War was still going on. The Soviet Union and the United States were rivals for world influence. The Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And I think it was about access to natural gas or some sort of petroleum product. And the United States was not happy about this. We did not want the Soviet Union expanding their influence, especially when it affects oil. So the United States secretly helped fund Afghans to fight the Soviet invaders. And so what did the United States do? The United States sent spies over there, people who secretly were going to help these people fight the Soviets. Well, one thing that the CIA did, the Central Intelligence Agency, our spies, we sent Stinger missiles and we trained these Afghans to shoot down Soviet helicopters. And here's a picture of one of those Soviet helicopters down here. And so after years, the Soviet Union left Afghanistan in defeat. It was kind of like the Soviet Union's Vietnam. They went into a foreign country and got their butts beat. Okay. And so we helped, we had our role in that. But unfortunately, the people that we trained to fight the Soviet Union ended up turning on us. You see that man on the left on the top? That is Osama bin Laden. And look at the clothes he's wearing. He's wearing American Army clothes. And so the CIA helped Osama bin Laden and trained him and a bunch of other people how to fight. And so this victory in Afghanistan gave these people in Afghanistan confidence. They thought to themselves, we can beat a Christian army, a very powerful Christian army, if we are smart. So this confidence is going to lead to years of terrorism against the United States. So a little geography, where is Afghanistan? Well, no, it's over here, and it is a landlocked country. Here's Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, and India down here. Okay. So, Al Qaeda. What is Al Qaeda? It is a stateless terrorist organization. It was led and financed by Osama bin Laden. And there's this picture down there. Keep in mind, Osama bin Laden is from Saudi Arabia, not Afghanistan. So, bin Laden was the son of a wealthy Saudi Arabian family. Osama bin Laden made lots of friends in Afghanistan. He learned that scantily armed Muslims could defeat a powerful Christian army. The Soviet army will eventually leave Afghanistan in 1988. That's a long time. Now, almost totally unrelated, In 1983, President Reagan was president. A terrorist group bombed a Marine barracks in Lebanon. Reagan did not retaliate. 283 people and a lot of U.S. Marines were killed. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, it's the method of taking a big truck, filling up with explosives, and detonating it in front of a building and killing lots of people. The Al Qaeda terrorist network will use that in other ways too. You might think Oklahoma City bombing. Now, this is very important and it has a little bit to do with terrorism, but not a lot. In 1990, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded the tiny oil rich country of Kuwait. So, check the map. Here is Kuwait, it's not a very big country, and here is Iraq. So, Iraq invades Kuwait. It turns out that Kuwait owed Iraq a lot of money. And so Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and a lot of oil fields. Okay. Kuwait is basically a big sand field with oil derricks. I mean, I might be exaggerating, but that's how they make their money. So Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait because he got this idea that the United States didn't care and that nobody would care. Well, he was wrong about one thing. Because look at the country south of Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia, we buy a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia. And another thing, I want you to know that this is a big sandbox. Okay, there are no mountains, no rivers. There is nothing to stop Saddam Hussein from taking his army of tanks south and invading Saudi Arabia. And in 1990, the last thing we wanted was Saudi Arabia to be controlled by Saddam Hussein. We buy a lot of oil from Saudi Arabia, and we did not want our oil prices to go up. And the Iraqi army had a really big army. We know that because we sold them. Well, you see those tanks on the left there? We sold them those tanks. Okay, so the Iraqi army, we made a lot of money selling the Iraqis tanks. So we knew all about their tanks. And we were a little nervous in 1990. So, what is the United States going to do? Well, the United States goes to Saudi Arabia and says, let us deal with Saddam Hussein. And there is Vice President Dick Cheney right there talking to the Saudis and saying, let us deal with Saddam Hussein. Let us deal with Iraq. Now, Saudi Arabia has to think about that. Do we want the Americans in our country? Do we want an American Christian army in the Holy Land of Islam? Keep in mind that this is the birthplace of Muhammad, and they do not necessarily want the United States in their country. They want to sell us oil and leave it at that. But Osama bin Laden, who has a lot of connections in Saudi Arabia, he says, let me deal with the Iraqis. Let me deal with Saddam Hussein. I have a lot of experience dealing with powerful armies. Let me and my army deal with Saddam Hussein. Let us deal with Iraq. We don't need the Americans. So what do the Saudis choose to do? They choose to let the Americans deal with it. And so President George Herbert Walker Bush takes the United States Army and a lot of other countries, by the way, to go to Kuwait and liberate Kuwait. And this picture is the result of the Iraqi army stealing cars from Kuwait and trying to drive home to Iraq. And the United States Army just murdered them. Okay. I mean, it was war, and we had helicopters, we had heat seeking missiles, we had tanks, and it was a very fast war. Very few Americans died. It was a very quick war, and we call this war the Persian Gulf War. We've also called it Desert Storm and things like that, but it's called the Persian Gulf War. And the United States at the time had some of the best tanks in the world. These tanks will go 60 miles an hour and can fire at the same time. Um, Another thing about this war is this was the first war in American history where women did fight in combat roles. Now, we've had women fight in wars before, but not in America. I mean, we've had a few exceptions, but this is the first time women had died in combat. This is the first time women were sergeants and corporals and lieutenants. And you had some of them die in this war. Not a lot, but a few. And so now women are getting a step closer to equality, for good or bad. Another first in the Persian Gulf War is the use of GPS, the same global positioning system that your phone uses, the same that Waze and Google Maps uses, and iMaps. They use GPS. They use a whole lot of satellites to do a whole lot of math to figure out where you are. And considering that Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait don't have a lot of landmarks, GPS was very important. These tanks had GPS, planes had GPS, missiles had GPS. So that was a first in modern warfare. And here's another picture that kind of a cool picture, but Saddam Hussein was really angry at the Americans in Kuwait. So what he had his men do is set fire to oil fields all across Kuwait and then abandon them. And a lot of soldiers breathed in this horrible smoke and stuff and got sick. It's called Gulf War syndrome. So that's a thing. So, what is the Persian Gulf War? George Herbert Walker Bush liberated Kuwait from Saddam Hussein of Iraq in 1990. Now, this is not what we call the Iraq War. That's a different war that will start in 2003, 13 years later. But this did happen. We did not destroy Iraq. We did not kill Saddam Hussein. That's a different war. Okay? All right. So now, I want to talk to you about 9/11. Now, when I say 9/11, I mean the September 11th, 2001 attacks. Um, but I don't want to talk about that just yet, though. In 1993, a man rented a Ryder truck and detonated a large bomb in one of the towers, hoping to knock it over onto the other towers. There was a terrorist who worked for Al Qaeda who had, get this, he had a college degree in chemistry and he had a college degree in engineering. Imagine that, though, having two college degrees. These terrorists are not dummies. And he rented a Ryder truck and parked it in underneath one of the twin towers. And he said when he was arrested that if he had more bombs, it would have worked. He detonated a bomb and it killed 6 people and injured over 1,000, because of smoke inhalation and stuff. It was a shock in 1993 because in the United States, we were not used to having terrorist attacks. That was always something that happened over there, somewhere else. Okay. In 1998, Al Qaeda organized some bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and these were organized. 220 people were killed, and these bombs were destroying symbols of American power. And the mastermind of this attack was killed by Somali police in 2011. How does President Clinton respond to these attacks in Tanzania and Kenya? What he decides to retaliate. There was a camp in the middle of Afghanistan where Osama bin Laden and a bunch of Al Qaeda terrorists were training. There wasn't much there, just a few jungle gyms and stuff like that. There wasn't a lot there, but President Clinton felt like he had to do something. So he sends a bunch of Tomahawk missiles to this camp and destroys it. Now, I mean, again, the camp wasn't all that much, but Clinton felt like he had to do something. And these Tomahawk missiles use GPS, and they cost $150,000 each. Okay. And then September 11, 2001, 4 airplanes were hijacked by Al Qaeda terrorists. 2 planes crashed into the 2 World Trade Center towers. 1 crashed into the Pentagon, the military building of the U.S. Armed Forces, and another crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, likely because passengers forced the plane down. So here's a collection of some of the pictures from September 11th, 2001. On the right, those are the terrorists. A lot of them were from Saudi Arabia, some were from Pakistan. And this is a lot of info, but the guys on the far right, they were the pilots. And they went to a pilot school in Florida. And the flight instructor later said, I did find it interesting that they weren't interested in learning how to land the plane, only how to take off and steer it. 9/11, almost 3,000 people were killed from the immediate attack. And what's even more sad, I think it's very sad, 343 firefighters and paramedics were killed. The guy who did all the planning of this attack, his name was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So bin Laden was kind of above Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. So bin Laden's up there, but it was really Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that did all the planning. Some people jumped out of the World Trade Center buildings. It was either that or slowly burned to death. Sadly, when they jumped out of the buildings, sometimes they landed on other people on the ground. It's sad, but it's true. That did happen. And eventually, because jet fuel burns so hot that the flooring collapsed and the towers, when one floor collapses onto another, it creates a chain reaction. And then the weight of the 2 floors hits the floor beneath it. And then before you know it, the whole tower falls. And eventually, both of them will fall. Luckily, most of the tower had been evacuated. It's really incredible that only 4,000 people died, but still, it's pretty sad. This is an incredible picture because look, that's a floor, that's a floor, that's a floor. So really, this piece is the height of Sunset High School. That's 3 stories right there. It's crazy to think of the scale of that picture. This is a color picture. You can tell because you got the firemen, and they spent weeks looking for bodies. This is a color picture too. You can see a little bit of blue sky. You can see a traffic light right there. In addition to the 2 planes in New York City, you have the Pentagon. Now, there's not a lot of video that covers this, but the Pentagon is in Washington, D.C., and that's where the generals are. That's where they do the war planning. That's where they do the administration of the military. It's called and it's not a lot to look at, but it's freaky to think that we could get attacked at the Pentagon of all places. This is the Pentagon from above, and you can see where the attack happened. And finally, and there's not a lot to look at, but because planes are designed to be light, so when that plane crashed and all that jet fuel burned, it didn't leave a whole lot to look at. It's possible even that the plane crashed with the nose. So when it crashed hard. Obviously, no survivors. And there's a whole movie called Flight 93. I haven't seen it because, unlike people your age, 9/11 does affect me, and I really don't care to watch movies about 9/11. I'll watch movies on World War II all day long, but 9/11, it's too real for me because I was an adult when it happened. So, now what? Al Qaeda and the Taliban government of Afghanistan were virtually one and the same. President George W. Bush sent a small force into Afghanistan to eliminate the government and destroy Al Qaeda. And this is spring of 2020, and to some extent, this war is still going on. Or I mean, not a lot of people die there anymore, but it's very limited now, but it's going to end very soon. It's going to end very soon. So, what is the Afghanistan war? It's a war in response to the September 11th attacks. It was to destroy Al Qaeda and the Taliban government of Afghanistan. And this is America's longest war, longer than Vietnam. Not as deadly, but longer and more expensive. So the United States invaded Afghanistan. Why? Because that's where bin Laden was, that's where Al Qaeda was. So the United States invaded Afghanistan to punish Al Qaeda and to get rid of them. And those are some Navy shooting some probably Tomahawk missiles at targets in Afghanistan. And finally, after years of fighting in Afghanistan, in 2011, bin Laden was killed by U.S. Navy SEALs. And he was living in Pakistan. And this was inside the Pakistan border. And so Pakistan was not happy that we sent a small part of our army in there to kill him, but that's what we did. We just don't respect Pakistan. The United States was probably afraid that Pakistan would warn bin Laden to run away, but we got him. September 2002, Pakistani officials arrested Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the 9/11 mastermind. And he was the planner of 9/11. Now, if you may have heard of waterboarding, they waterboarded Khalid Sheikh Mohammed for days straight trying to get information out of him. They tortured Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. They got nothing out of him. So, and this is important, how did the United States respond to the September 11th attacks? Well, President Bush signed the Homeland Security Act. And what's that going to do? It's going to increase domestic spying. So you see all the memes about the FBI reading our emails. Actually, that's the NSA. They don't sit around and read your emails, but they do scan millions of emails for certain tag words, like, for example, praise Allah, things like that. So if you are a Muslim, then yeah, they probably scan your emails. They probably don't read every single word, but the NSA does spy on American citizens to some extent to look for new terrorist networks. Also, the 9/11 led to these blue shirts, the TSA agents, increased security at airports. And it also increased border security. We've actually had a few Al Qaeda terrorists try to sneak into the country through the Canadian border. Okay, I mean, it's rare, but it does happen. So, this is a meme criticizing the TSA, and this is a joke. Okay, nobody likes the TSA. Okay, and some people say that they don't really do anything. And this is a joke. So, which of the following was a factor that contributed to the growth of Al Qaeda? Okay, so hit pause if you need to. The answer is the Taliban government of Afghanistan provided Al Qaeda with bases and support. Okay, that's the best answer we've got. Okay. Cabinet posts in the United States have been created for a variety of reasons. What was the primary reason for the creation of the Department of Homeland Security? Okay, Homeland Security. So that's 9/11. Okay. Which step did the United States take in response to the acts of terrorism committed on September 11, 2001? Okay. Hit pause if you need to, hit the space bar to pause it, but the answer is B. We invaded Afghanistan. Okay, so you've got a list. The actions listed above were taken in response to the what? Okay, so let's look at the list. Department of Homeland Security, the USA Patriot Act, increased surveillance at US airports. So all that stuff was a response to your answer. So whatever answer you choose caused the list. So what caused the Patriot Act? What caused the TSA? The answer is C. September 11th attacks. Which of the following resulted from the US led military coalition's engagement in the Persian Gulf War? Oh, okay, so think back to the Persian Gulf War. So let's look at it again. Which of the following resulted from the Persian Gulf War? The answer is B. Saddam Hussein was forced. That's not true. No, I got the arrow wrong. The answer is C. The answer is C. The nation of Kuwait was liberated. Sorry, B, that's different. That's the Iraq War. The answer is C. The nation of Kuwait was liberated. That is a result of the Persian Gulf War. Which headline describes an event that resulted from the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001? So, what happened as a result? The Afghanistan War. Okay. Okay. Now, let me give you a tip on how to read passages. Whenever you see whenever you see somebody reading something, give it a voice. Now, I know what Bush sounds like. You may not, but he's from Texas, so I'm going to give him a Texan voice when I read this, and I'm not going to move my jaw a lot. So here it goes. Oh, and let's look at the date. September 26, 2001. Okay, so think about what major event happened right before this. So I'm going to read it. We are on a mission to make sure that freedom is enduring. We are on a mission to say to the rest of the world, come with us. Come with us. Stand by our side to defeat the evildoers who would like to rid the world of freedom as we know it. Okay, so that's kind of just not a very useful speech, but if you look at the date, that gives you the hint. So, what happened right before September 26, 2001? The answer is B. So, the war in Afghanistan is a part of the war on terrorism. The war on terrorism. And that's enough for today. Thank you very much.